This is Innovation.Connected, coming to you from the World Economic Forum in Davos, a podcast by Tenity.
We have here Thomas. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe you do a quick introduction about yourself and what is your current role?
Yeah, I can do that. And thanks for inviting. I'm Thomas. I'm the CEO of Copenhagen Fintech. Copenhagen-based, obviously, Nordic-focused, and with a global community working within fintech, innovation, financial services, what have you.
Why global community? That's already interesting from Copenhagen.
Yeah.
I mean,
at least we try to build a global community, but hence also me being here.
Okay. What was the reason for coming to Davos?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually my first time.
Okay.
And I arrived today, so only been here for a few hours. So I've been walking up and down the street here and trying to figure out what to do. Already met a lot of fintech friends.
Yes.
So I think my purpose, besides being invited by Tenity to come here, I think my purpose is to really figure out, how is Copenhagen fintech relevant in this context? I think what is the talk of the town, the global agenda on some of the things that we are preoccupied with, which is of course mainly financial services and technology, but the global conversation that is going around those topics.
Okay, thank you.
So curious and exploring and getting ready for next year.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it will be interesting to interview you after 4 days, because also there will be a couple of experiences.
Probably, yes. Probably.
That is a short version we also probably do. Maybe you can give a bit more context. What is your role? What does it mean being the CEO of Copenhagen Fintech?
Sure. That means a lot of different things, right? So maybe just a little bit of our history. We started and grew out of the industry in the Nordics, the financial industry, and I was employee number 1 8 years ago. Hired in from the industry, so my background is from financial services for, I'm afraid to say, like 30 years around. Hence the gray hair. We developed quite a lot over the past 8 years. We're still non-for-profit and a public-private partnership. We were put in the world to kind of foster innovation and to make sure that the Nordics also play a role in the global fintech landscape. I think 8 years ago, it was still very much a question mark how that would end up. The conversation was very much like the fintechs are coming, eating the lunch of the banks or the financial industry. I think it didn't turn out, which was probably good. It didn't turn out quite that way. Now it's much more about collaboration, sourcing innovation, talent, and so on and so forth. So I think we've been moving from starting our co-working space in the middle of Copenhagen with a few companies sitting. Now we had around 300 companies going through us, sitting with us physically in Copenhagen and our other office in another part of Denmark. We developed programs together with you guys. We can talk about that later.
Yes.
We built a global, and I can say that because it's a big community of financial institutions that are looking towards the Nordics to source innovation, because there are some special traits and some features that characterizes the financial innovation in the Nordics that are quite exciting on a global scale.
Why is that so? Maybe what's the specialty? Maybe we can.
I think the Nordic region and the Nordic countries in general are a little bit. It's a small region. If you look at, it's a small region, small countries, and together a small region. But if you look at some of the most innovative countries, if you look at rankings, are actually Nordic countries. Some of the most digitized countries are actually Nordic countries. If you look at some of the most sustainable countries in the world, are actually also the Nordic countries. And all these, like the most digitized, the most innovative, and the most sustainable, those rankings we actually share together with the Swiss. So I think there's also a kind of an interesting connection between Switzerland and the Nordic region, which we can also touch upon later. But so I think it's very, even though we see ourselves as being quite different, I think from the outside you would probably find us quite alike. Quite alike.
Yeah. Very good point. I mean, quick question, because these fintech associations are globally all a bit different. So what's your main business model, and who are your members? Or how do you make money? How do you spend money?
Sure.
That we have a quick overview in which...
That's a good place to start. Always start with understanding the business model.
Yeah.
Right? So ours is part public and part private.
Okay.
Which for us functions very well in the sense that I think there's, in terms of what we do and our raison d'etre, so to speak, is fostering innovation, but through startups.
Mm-hmm.
So we work with the startup ecosystem in the Nordics. And I think especially in the early stages, that is a little bit hard. In the very early stages, that's a little bit harder to commercialize and have a business model on, unless you're an investor, which we are not. And therefore, we rely on public funding to do the work in the very early stages in the universities. You know, with the one person coming in with a good idea and wanting to do a fintech startup, we spend quite a lot of time and resources on developing that part of the ecosystem, and for that we need public money because there's no commercial model around that, unless again you're an investor. And then later stages where it becomes attractive for financial institutions, even more attractive for investors, tech companies, and so on and so forth. Then there are other business models on that, and that's where our private funding comes in.
Do you have memberships as well?
So we have memberships, we have partnerships, we do a little bit of consultancy, so different ways. We run the biggest Nordic Fintech conference, which is also a revenue source, and also a way for us to gather the community, both the Nordic community but also the global community, and make them look towards the Nordics.
Okay. How many members do you have, roughly?
300 plus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's quite a success story.
It's we're doing okay. We're doing okay. We're like an organization of plus 20 people, and we have a lot of engagement with financial institutions, investors, and startups. So we're quite happy with what we do.
How would you define innovation?
That's the big question. It's basically coming up with new stuff or for new markets, new customer segments, and then you can ask, what is new stuff? I could see that question.
No. But I think it's good to start on that topic first, right? Because there's a lot talk about that, but very different execution.
Sure.
So also to get more into how you see that and how you foster it.
Sure. I think if you look at the financial industry, the way it's been used to being done, right, is like basically the biggest innovator are the regulators, right? They were the ones that were telling us when to create new stuff, and so I think the industry as such has been, at least in the Nordic region, and I think to some extent you can look at that on a broader scale also. Like they were innovating when they were forced to.
Yes.
Either by the regulators or by market conditions, and it's been a very inside-out perspective. So when they decided to do something, develop something, it was probably something that they needed to do in order to serve their own business model or changing business model or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit harsh now, but I think you get my point.
Yeah.
I think in the 500 years since the first bank opened in Florence in Italy, I think it's the fundamentals of the financial industry hasn't changed much. Then there's technology and there's digitalization and all that kind of stuff happening on top, but the fundamentals haven't changed a lot. And so there is an industry, and also and you can probably argue against that, but I think there's also an industry that's been quite risk adverse, which is understandable. It is the financial industry. To some extent, they live from not taking risks. So and innovation means inherently taking risks. So it hasn't been natural for the industry to innovate in the same way as you see in other industries.
Yeah. But on the other side, I mean, the big ones have often a pressure, right? I mean, this is also a coexistence between startups and the incumbent players.
Yeah, sure. Definitely true. But I think what happened was that, 15, 20 years ago maybe, or whenever it was that when fintech started taking off, that started off from on top of a financial crisis, right? So trust was eroding. Technology was becoming more available, so the entry barriers were, at least in some parts of the value chain, were coming down. So it was easier to do innovation in the financial industry. Margins, it was obviously there were some pretty interesting margins. So the VCs started coming in and saw that there was some good deals to be made. And in general, the development of technology, made it obvious. And the biggest spender globally on technology and one of the biggest investors in AI, that's the financial industry. So it had to come.
Yeah,
it had to happen.
Okay, so how relevant are the big ones compared to the startups? I mean, this is often, I think, quite a controversial discussion. I mean, also when you look into all the venture studios and everything which is now developed, where people want to build companies in that space. But how do you see they work together?
I think they need to work together, right? So as an incumbent player, and with the pace of the technology innovation that is happening right now, you just cannot. And I think especially when you look at the Nordic region, where there's a lot of smaller financial institutions, I think they just cannot develop it all themselves, and they cannot keep up with that pace. So you need to have a strategy that spans some stuff you probably and strategically the stuff that is closest to your core, you might want to be in control and develop that yourself. Some of the use cases, niche use cases, or some of the stuff that you, for various reasons, wouldn't be able to develop yourself, you need to procure from the outside. You'll partner up with startups or technology companies, and to some extent you also, in some areas, you might need to buy either talent or technology, right?
Yeah.
So build, borrow, or buy.
Yeah. But still, I mean, at least that's what I saw in different regions. It's like, it's theoretically, is it like that? And often the big ones still struggle to collaborate with startups. Like, still, I mean, also the corporate VC area was also a bit difficult, or did not take off as it was planned, right?
No, definitely. I think we've seen examples of corporate VCs that have been doing quite well, but I totally agree, and I think especially also in the Nordic region, there were several examples of banks doing corporate VCs and then closing it down again, right? Because they just didn't know what to do.
So what are the programs you usually run then in the Nordics, or especially in Copenhagen?
Yeah. So we run programs for startups. So everything from the very early, we have programs where we do more tech for Fin, where we try to go to the universities and explore a little bit some of the research that might be interesting for the financial industry to look at. I think right now, that could be examples of that could be in the quantum space, where it's not directly implementable right now, but there's some interesting research going on, and that could be one. So we have a tech for Fin, where we help the researchers commercialize their ideas. We also have programs where we do incubation, like standard incubation programs, where we come in early and help the companies with whatever challenges they have at that maturity level, which is quite early. And then we have programs together with Tenity, the Nordic New Challengers, or the new Nordic Challengers. Yeah.
Can you say something about that and how the collaboration was and how it started?
Yeah. I think we've known you guys for quite some times and come across what you've been doing in both Singapore and London and various other places, and we are even though with a global community, we're very much focused on the Nordics and want to be good at what we're doing and build that community. And I think the interesting fit here is that Tenity is very global, if not with a physical presence everywhere in the world, but you definitely have some interesting locations, among those in Singapore, for instance, London, and some of the big financial hubs, right? Of course, Zurich too. So I think you're complementing us very well. You were already doing some programs in the Nordics. We wanted to expand our reach in the Nordics, but also provide access to the startups from the Nordics to a global player, a global network, which is very much what Tenity is providing here, right? So I think pretty much the most optimal partnership you could imagine.
Oh, thanks for that. And I mean, talking about our audience, I mean, they probably would like to hear more about the startups in Nordics, or what kind of different verticals you would say you should look into. Maybe you can give some examples, or at least where you see a lot of, let's say, development tractions on the one hand by the startups, also by funding, which could be interesting to hear about.
Sure. And I think first, what is interesting, and I think the Nordics in terms of startups, led by, especially in the fintech area, I think very much led by Sweden, and then Denmark as number 2, and then Norway and Finland afterwards, Iceland, of course. But I think you've seen a region that punches quite above its own weight, and we have some pretty good success cases. I think the most obvious being, of course, Klarna from Sweden. But if you start looking into it, you will find companies such as Pleo, the expense management there, like in 16 countries now. You would see when I just got off the train here in Davos, I ran into the CEO of Chainalysis, Jonathan Levin. What I think not so many people know is that, first of all, they were one of the first companies that actually moved in the Copenhagen Fintech Lab back in the days. And the founder is Danish. They're now headquartered in the US, but the founder was at that point, together with Jonathan, was Michael Grøndager, which is a Dane. And you see Tradeshift, another fintech unicorn, being Danish but headquartered in the US.
Which areas are they working? Maybe quickly.
Trade finance and Pleo expense management, Chainalysis, like kind of creating transparency into the crypto economy, right? So I think a lot of really cool companies have actually come out of the Nordics. Some of them now headquartered outside, and which points to a problem that we can discuss a little bit later on. The Europe's problem in kind of fostering and keeping those tech companies, right? But a lot of cool stuff is happening in the Nordics. I think if you look at what kind of verticals are really interesting and why big financial institutions look at the Nordics, the Nordics being fairly wealthy countries. And I think the whole area of wealth management, I think we see quite some interesting innovation going on there. Everything from the different advisory tools, AI, and applied on the advisory side, to obviously digital assets and what have you. So I think the broader kind of definition of how you manage and get advice around your wealth, we see some cool stuff happening there. Another area, the whole SME space, fintech for SMEs, very much accelerated by, if you look at the adoption of cloud accounting systems, I think 85% of SMEs in the Nordics use some kind of cloud accounting system.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot, especially the sooner you once you start moving south of the border from Denmark, the adoption is maybe, I don't know, 10-15% or something like that, right? I don't know how it is in Switzerland.
Yes, I don't know the figure myself, but let's say a personal feeling is definitely that it's lower. But I'm more lower in Germany. Not that Switzerland is maybe even already more advanced on that side. And
I think there's reasons for that, probably also tax reasons. But in the Nordics, there's we're used to we're a fairly as societies and as people, we have a high degree of trust. So it's fairly easy to get people and businesses to give away their data.
Yeah.
We trust that it's handled in a proper way. So adoption of some of these kind of solutions and services are quite high. And especially on the SME side, once you start giving away your data on your business, you can get a lot of different insights, and you can build a lot of innovation and different financial services, access embedded finance into some of these platforms. So on SME fintech, we see a lot of interesting stuff happening. And then I think an area that Tenity also started to realize was that when it comes to sustainability, like climate fintech, the Nordics is also quite a hotbed for that. And some of the interesting companies, Duconomy, I think your Tenity is even an early investor in Duconomy, is a good example of that. Matter in Denmark that is doing ESG screening and so on and so forth. So there's quite some interesting companies also in that space.
Maybe two things on that. First, where's the trust coming from? I mean, is this a regulatory frame? Where does that come from?
It's a good question where it comes from. Where does it originate from? I think in general the Nordic countries are there. That's actually how it originated. It's a good point to reflect on. Why are we so? Why do we trust? We are
because you're also very digitized in general, right? Also the government, the taxes, the people themselves. I'm thinking in Denmark you have even the letters you get on an app, right?
Yeah.
So this is.
Yeah, there is certainly a high degree of trust. The origins of it, I'm not. I have to reflect a little bit on that because it is a good question. It's a good question. I think the interesting thing is where we can see in other countries, whether it's digital identity, it's like how do you file your data for tax reasons? How do you whatever the government asks us to do? There might be a little bit of discussion, but eventually we all end up doing it, and it's because we have this fundamental trust that it's going to be handled okay, that it's going to be handled in a way that benefits us ultimately, and I think we're very equal countries, right? It's which also creates some disadvantages, but there's not the difference between rich and poor are not that big in the Nordic countries, right?
Okay.
So we're very equal countries also.
Okay. And another one is, I mean, as you know, we are globally active, and we also try to connect our different hubs and different ecosystems, and we also look more and more into the Middle East. So how open are your companies or the companies which are in your ecosystem to go abroad? How do you see the Middle East as maybe a potential country where they go, and maybe also some take on Asia, Hong Kong, China, if that's something where they would look into that?
So I think in general they're very open to scaling into other regions, and that for a very obvious reason, right? And that is that their home market is not that big. 6 million in Denmark, 11-12 million in Sweden, and that's the biggest market in the Nordics, right? 27-28 million in the whole of the Nordics. So I would say many of the companies, they are born to scale from the get-go. Their ability to do it, then that's another thing that I think is that we're discussing a lot, because I think in general what you see is that companies up to a certain size struggle a little bit after that with really scaling. And I think some of the companies here, Klarna, Genesis, Tradeshift, Pleo, whatever, are really good example of companies that made it. But there's a lot of other companies that are struggling. The typical scaling journey of a Nordic company goes Nordics, UK, US, and then some of them, depending on what they do and the market fit, goes southern part of Europe, right? But what we have been trying to do with our network is actually to open up Asia also, because we think there's so much interesting going on in and of course very big economies in India. We've been and that's not a big but they set the tone for the region. Singapore, super interesting, and Japan. So we've been putting quite a lot of resources in Asia. A little bit, we haven't seen a lot of traction in the Middle East as of now, but we can definitely see that is interesting and are starting to explore that a bit. We again also resources being limited. I think we prioritized Asia and now starting to look at other regions.
Okay, maybe you can also give us a bit an investor overview. Like, I mean, is this mainly local investors, corporate investors in your ecosystem, or foreign investors?
Yeah. So I think in that respect, we are pretty similar with many other countries in Europe, right? So it's very much local, up to a certain, or typically up to a Series A, and then you see investors from outside of the Nordics coming in, basically, and then when it's the big rounds, then there's UK, US based investors. Okay. And I think pointing towards one of the problems in Europe right now is that you basically are raising to small rounds in order to really create the fast growing tech companies in Europe, right? Okay. So I think that's one thing we're quite concerned with, and also would like to focus on going forward in the financial industry. But you see that in most of the other tech verticals also, the picture is the same. Yeah. The EU came out with recently with the report on the EU competitiveness, pointing exactly towards that. I recently saw a map of, it was a US company created over the last 50 years with a 10 billion market cap, more than 10 billion market cap. It was a very crowded map in the US. It was very small dots in Europe. So that's something that worries me personally, and it worries us. How do we reverse that trend? And I think I recently saw an interview with Jeff Bezos. He said it very very clear. Like, the reason why the US is doing so well is because we have a phenomenal VC ecosystem. Yeah, and that's what Europe, at the end of the day, that's what drives it. That's what Europe need to develop.
Do you think they can develop that?
Of course, it's not that we don't have the money. They're just not deployed. Yes, and which is, all statistics say that if you look at financial institutions, asset managers, family offices, and so on, the exposure to an alternative asset class like private equity is just way higher in the US. Yeah. So of course we can do it. It's just we just need to do it.
So maybe one last question. I mean, you come from corporate life, right? And now you're in the innovation space, or have more contact with the whole ecosystem. So if you would go back now to a corporate, and you can decide how innovation will happen at that corporate, imagine it's a financial institution. Yeah. What would you do?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure I would, okay. But that's another. What would I do? I think there are some fundamentals in order to make innovation happen, and some of it is like embracing uncertainty, or making people feel comfortable with uncertainty, that they don't need to know everything. I think we're rapidly moving from an area of where I, as a manager or as an employee, needed to know it all, to more being comfortable with learning and continuously learning, right? And then I think there's a big thing. In order to make innovation happen, you need to create a kind of a space for psychological safety, and that's not. I think like old school financial services is not exactly characterized by necessarily psychological safety, right? It's very hierarchical. It's like, and I think to some extent that's also why innovation haven't thrived, because that was not how we were brought up in financial services. That was not what was rewarded to have the crazy ideas and run with them, right? So I think embrace uncertainty and make sure that there's psychological safety. That is the number one driver for innovation.
Thank you for that. Why you don't want to go back? If you can get that.
Yeah, I think I have one of the best jobs in the world. I'm very happy where I am. So
perfect. That's the perfect end to close here. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting.
And looking forward to hear your thoughts after the week. Thank you.
Thank you.